Hello again. Today I'm going to talk about periodization, the annual training plan, and how I put together a training plan for an athlete, which I thought you might find useful. So I gave this presentation on, I think last week, on our group Zoom meeting for our training group. We do one-to-one coaching, and if you're interested in that, then please let us know, and hopefully we can start working with you. It'd be great to work with you. So the annual training cycle. I've got the slides, so I'll just go through the slides with you. So there are various strategies, as many strategies as you can imagine, but I've just talked about two of the main ones here. So the traditional approach is where you spend a period of time doing base work, maybe say 12 to 16 weeks, sometimes a bit longer if you've got more time, and that you do mostly endurance riding, you do not a lot of interval work, maybe some tempo work, and then you move into a period of higher intensity work, which is called the build period, where you sort of build in your fitness towards a more specific race criteria, and then you get into your race season, or you peak towards your event. And that's the period that, that's been traditional for many, many years in endurance sports. I think periodization came in through swimming initially, but running, cycling, triathlon, etc. And then there's what's known as reverse periodization, whereby you do your high intensity work first, and then you build your endurance on that. And the theory being that once you've developed the higher intensity powers, you can just extend the period that you can ride at that intensity for as you move towards your race season. And that works really well for people who are in the sort of, if you're in the northern hemisphere, if you're in the northern part of the northern hemisphere where the weather's quite cold and it's quite hard to train outside in the winter, then it's quite useful to do as an indoor trainer, do some high intensity work. It's a bit less boring. You could do, like on Zwift, you could do Zwift races, which are typically very high intensity. And then as the weather improves, you can get outside, do some longer rides and build your endurance in that way. And that can work pretty well for some people, but and then of course there's no periodization where you just mix it up all the time, and that can work quite well as well. And there are obviously many strategies, some people will say that their strategy is the only way to go, and that's the only one that works. But in actual fact, if you look at the scientific evidences, there's actually, they all produce similar results. So as long as you train in sensible in a structured way and progressively, there's no sort of right or wrong way to structure the season. So it's best to stick with the three main principles of training, which do work, obviously. Overload, whereby if you don't overload your system, your body won't react, you won't get any fitter, because you need to stress your system, make it react during the periods of recovery. So you need plenty of recovery, you need to get a proper amount of recovery and balance the overload and recovery. Overload your system, recover, it builds back stronger, overload it again, builds back stronger. And then the second one is progression, but it logically follows that if you continually try to overload and recover, you will progress. So training has to be progressive. And specificity. So if you want to... so specificity means you're training specifically for your event. So for instance, if you want to race cyclocross, which is a highly variable event, where you might do certain short bursts, you have to run up steps and various things like that. It's not very specific to do sort of 6-hour endurance rides. I mean, there's a place to build up that aerobic fitness and do your long endurance rides, but it's not specific to your event. So your training has to be specific, and typically it becomes increasingly specific as you move towards your event. And of course, the final one here is what I call use it or lose it. It's related to specificity. So basically, if you don't train a particular system, you will get worse at that because your performance levels will drop off. I don't think you ever drop back to zero to where you started. I think you always retain a certain degree of fitness. But you certainly, if you're training to be a sprinter and you stop doing sprint training and do a lot of endurance work, then your sprint powers will drop off. And conversely, if you want to train endurance, then and you do a lot of sprint training and stop doing endurance, then your endurance will drop off a bit as well. It's not entirely like that, but it's, that's the basic principle. So what do I do? Well, I have a sort of progressive approach. Initially, these are steps I take. So I sort of think about when I start working with somebody, typically, or at the end of the season, or even during the season, we might review things. Or if there's a change of phase, say somebody races cyclocross in the winter and mountain bike marathons in the summer, then we would have to change emphasis for the different seasons. And so we look for strengths and weaknesses relative to the goal. Like I said, if somebody's racing cyclocross, they don't need to ride for, it's typically 40 to 60 minutes. They don't need to be able to ride for 6 hours. And similarly, if somebody's doing a bikepacking event, they don't need to be able to produce high anaerobic powers for short bursts of effort, so they don't need to work on that anaerobic capacity. If you look at my previous slide, you know a bit more about anaerobic capacity. Previous video. So what I do then is I split the week into 6 to 8 week blocks. And the reason for that is that's typically the amount of time it takes to make a physiological change, and also you could say a psychological change as well takes time, maybe a couple of months. And then I had event goals, so you might have a number of events that you want to do throughout the season. You might have an A race in the winter season and an A race in the summer. Or you might have one big event per year, or if you're training for the Olympics or Paralympics, like Karen Dark, who I worked with for a couple of Paralympic cycles, who's decided to retire from professional sport now. That's a 4-year cycle, or in the case of this year, it was a 5-year cycle, but obviously COVID caught us out a bit there. And so you've then got some sort of framework to work with, and you know where you're trying to reach your peak, and then I either work for with the least specific thing for the event, or the most specific thing for the event, or what I call the fundamental thing. So if you were doing an endurance event, the most important thing is to, you want to be able to finish it. So, because if you don't finish it, there's no point at all. Or if you don't think you've got a good chance of finishing it, then it's not a race, is it? It's not really an event. So if you're unsure whether you can actually ride at the pace required to finish within the required cutoff or within your target cutoff time, then that's what your training focus needs to be. And once you've reached that, then you can start thinking about getting faster and improving your performance. And that might be similarly if you might have set up an interim goal that forms a stepping stone towards your ultimate goal, and the interim goal might be a fundamental thing that you need to do to achieve your final goal. If you know that you can finish your event, or you know you can do the fundamental things that you need to do to finish your event or complete the event, then you work on the least specific thing first. So for instance, if you were say you wanted to race a mountain bike marathon, and you knew that it had some steep sections that you would like to be able to ride up, but you might not be able to do that now. It might be that you, even with the lowest gear you can get, you might need to create a lot of torque. You need to apply a lot of force to the pedals, or if you're doing cyclocross, back to the other example, if you if you have to really sort of sprint up a short hill, sometimes you get really short, steep climbs. If you can stay on your bike, there could be an advantage to that. Then building up your actual strength, the amount of force you can apply, could increase your power. So actually doing some gym work early in the season, which is not very specific to cycling, could be the focus for 1 or 2 6 to 8 week periods. And then you become more specific as you move towards your event. So it's important to work on all elements of fitness. So, it's good. You want to include some interval training if you're emphasizing endurance, and if you're emphasizing, say you're doing a big strength block, you need to be doing some riding. But you might want to do less aerobic work if you're doing strength work, because doing aerobic training switches off the signal to improve your strength. So And also an important point to note is if you're doing strength work, you need to be lifting heavy weights, you need to be overloading your system. So you keep everything in your plan, change the emphasis, so you try and develop a specific thing, because you can only really develop one or two things at a time, but you want to maintain the other things because you like this use it or lose it type thing. And then the other thing that I do is I've spent a lot of time developing overall plans in great detail, like many of you have probably done. I've read through Joe Friel's training Bibles and come up with really detailed plans, and then I found that something went wrong, so the plan couldn't quite work. You might get fitter faster than you expect, or you might get fitter slower than you expect, or a certain strain stimuli might work differently to what you expect, because we're basically humans, and there are a huge number of variables involved in what we do and how we progress, and they're not all controllable, and they're not all specific to actual training for our sport. So what I like to do is work with a framework with these interim goals, which can be events or a target to achieve at the end of the 6 to 8 week period. And if you achieve the target at the end of the 6 to 8 week period, then you can change the emphasis. If you don't, then you might want to do another block of training on that particular specific item, because that might be deemed to be the most important thing. Or if it's like the strength thing that we talked about, which isn't specific to performance, there's obviously going to be a time that you need to switch from things that aren't specific to your event towards things that are specific to your event. Be more flexible, reactive, change things as you go along, and that basically, the more flexible you are and more able you are to react within that framework, the better your performance is going to be. So I hope that makes sense. So you basically have an overall framework with some goals, specific goals to achieve, and then you keep changing that according to what actually happens, to give you your optimal performance along the way. And that's it. That's it. I hope you like this. Please like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.